The hardest part of a project is when you're halfway through. That's how I feel anyway. When you first started and the long anticipated goal are both far away from where you are now. In these times especially, you need to remain focused and continue on your path. And in this way, eventually, redemption will occur. One thing that usually helps me to retain my sanity with the bigger projects is when I manage to accomplish a smaller side project, such as finishing the kitchen in my steel yacht. Let's start by finishing the floor in the small seating area. Here, we first have to close this hole. I'm gonna cut out a section of the old floor to make sure that the new boards I'm putting in are resting properly on the frame underneath the floor. I put up a large cloth to catch the debris. I'm gonna use an angle grinder with a circular saw, and as usual, please note that this video doesn't necessarily follow the strict chronological order in which I did things. You may see things appear and disappear as we move along, but at least now you know why. With the hole fully cut, I remove the remaining loose floorboards so that I can reassemble them. Luckily, I still have most of the pieces I need. And to cover the hole I just cut, I use some leftover wooden planks, which have the exact same height as the floorboards inside the cabin. Here, I need to make some fine adjustments. Now just a little bit more and then the board will fit perfectly. I chip away the tongue of the old board so that I can close up this hole once and for all. This little gap here will be filled up with a small piece of wood. I screw down the remaining loose boards, and with that, the holes in this area are closed, and our floor is now perfectly stable again. Next, I'm gonna clean up this area. I'm gonna cut a straight line following that side panel, and then I can chip away these glued veneer boards. I'm gonna use one of the recovered veneer boards to cover up the gap over here. Now the floor is almost ready for the next step, but first I'm gonna move the position of the table a bit to the left, because I plan to make a new tabletop a bit smaller and a different shape than the previous one. Once I found the right position, I trace a line to mark where the steel frame is passing underneath the floor. I then draw a circle around the foot of the table and cut out the hole. Let's see if it fits. Perfect. To close up the remaining holes, I'm first gonna make a cardboard template. I simply press the cardboard around the edges. I cut out the template and draw the shape onto a thin plate of galvanized steel. This will now simply be glued onto the floor with a strong adhesive. To finish up, I'm gonna seal the wood with a protective coat of glaze. And so now the integral structure of the floor is fixed. All the holes are closed, and we have a robust, flat and even surface. I'm gonna cover up this section of the floor with a nice carpet. First, I have to cut it to size. I cut it so that it fits exactly into that area of the floor, so that all I have to do is to cut away the overlapping parts in the back. So now the carpet is already in place. I use aluminum strips to cover up the edges. They're gonna meet in a 45-degree angle. I screw them down directly into the floor. Finally, I cut out the hole for the table. Let's put the foot of the table in place so we can have a quick look. I find the grey carpet goes well with the white walls. The silver strips make a great transition between the carpet and the wooden floor. Now, before we continue with the seating area, let's focus our attention on the kitchen part of the forward cabin. I was never a fan of those plastic wall panels, nor that fake wooden room separator, but they hold up really nice, so I'm gonna keep them. But while we're changing things, let's paint them all white. Our apprentice was more than happy to perform the task. I put a fan above the hatch to maintain a healthy airflow inside the cabin. And though, after this first layer, it looks good from afar, upon a closer look, we noticed that the color didn't really cover that well, and there were some weird drips and bubbles inside the paint. So the apprentice sanded everything down and then gave it a second coat of paint. And just like that, all the walls are now white. I also painted that little safety board. In hindsight, we could have given it a third layer of paint, but once all the kitchen stuff is back in there, you'll hardly notice it. Alright, now back to the seating area. I'm gonna make a round tabletop out of this plywood plate. It's a perfect square, so to find the center, I simply draw 2 lines through the diagonals, then I put in a small screw. I put the noose of a thread around it. I tie a knot in the thread that sits exactly at the outer border of the plate. And here I made a little mistake. The knot was a bit too far out, and so the line went a couple of millimeters over the border of the plate. I hoped it would go away after I used this little battery-powered milling device. This worked great on the test piece. I also tried it with a curved piece of wood, and the result here was even better. So then I went and tried it on the tabletop. I put a heavy lead bar on it to stabilize the plate. Next I did the other side. And sadly, those straight edges didn't go away, but at this point I think that anything I will do is just gonna make it worse. So I take what I got and move on to sanding. At this point, I would like to mention a trick that a friend told me recently in order to get a really smooth finish after sanding and an ideal base for painting. If we look closely at the surface of the unsanded wood, we can see that part of the fibers are slightly elevated. That's the part you sand away eventually. Now, if we wet the surface of the wood just a little and then let it dry, the loose wood fibers will rise up. And so in this way, when you sand, you take away much more of the rough upper layer, which results in a smoother finish. Next, I'm gonna paint the tabletop with a couple of layers of boat lacquer. I cut out a piece of wood to use as a riser between the tabletop and the stand. After making sure that everything fits, I can screw the tabletop onto the stand. Next, I put the new table in place for the first time. I got matching chairs to go with the table. And just like that, we got a brand new, modern looking seating area. Next we move to this area in the galley. Here I'm gonna add a corner shelf. First I have to transfer the curve of the wall onto the boards. I transfer the curve of the wall onto the second board by using my special technique. The piece I just cut away can now be used to fill the gap behind the first two boards. Once again, I transfer the curve of the wall onto the board, this time by simply using an extended finger. Now to put the three pieces into a single board, I use wood glue on the edges. I then screw everything firmly together with these little metal plates. After making sure that I got the joint as seamless as possible, I sand everything down and then give it a first coat of boat lacquer. Back on the inside, after reassembling the different pieces of wood, I need to trim the side that touches the wall one more time. In this case, I'm using the handle of a carpet knife, but I can use basically anything that allows me to trace a line at a fixed distance from the wall. When I made this cut, the saw blade was dull, and I didn't notice it at first. As a result, I had to push the saw really hard, and this led to a very crooked cut. But I managed to sand away the worst of it, and I'm confident that in the end result, I'll be able to hide it completely. So in this way, the shelf would already work perfectly fine, but it doesn't look very good. So I'm gonna draw by hand a more graceful looking line, which should give the shelf a more appealing aesthetic. With the final curve drawn onto the wood and a fresh, sharp saw blade, I'm gonna attempt this career-defining cut. I make a few cuts perpendicular to the line to facilitate the removal of the cutaway parts. Next comes another coat of boat lacquer. I add some supports to the wall. And just like that, we got a beautiful new kitchen shelf. Now about those window frames. I know some of you are losing sleep over this question, and rightfully so. Unfortunately, so far, I only had time to work out the brief concept. I'm gonna use this very thin veneer wood, which is actually a 3-layer plywood plate. From this, I'm gonna cut out some squares according to the size of the different sections of the window frames. Eventually, I'm gonna somehow attach them, probably with very thin screws or nails. I plan to use these aluminum L profiles to cover up the edges. For this, of course, we first need to make a template. And in this way, I can very simply and easily figure out the right angles at which the different pieces of L profile will connect between each other. I transfer the angle from one profile to the other by overlapping them and drawing a line. Now let's see what it looks like once we put it in place. And there you have it. Me for one, I really like the combination of colors we get, so I might leave the thin veneer boards in their natural color, and I will keep you updated once the work is done. Alright, now about these open corners. I've added different types of corner strips according to whichever seemed to be most fitting. For this dimmer switch in the kitchen, I made a frame around it with leftover pieces of corner strips, which I simply glued together, then painted it white. and it fits so tightly that I don't even need to glue or screw it in place. I've installed a main cabin light by gluing an LED strip onto an L profile, and then I attached this right underneath the ceiling. The wire is hidden behind the wall panels. The white ceiling acts as a diffuser and serves as a soft and equally distributed source of light. And with that, I present to you my almost finished boat kitchen, or galley, as I should call it more correctly. It now has all the elements needed for a comfortable existence inside this boat. And of course, we can and will add more elements along the way to make it even more practical and convenient. Me for one, I'm pretty satisfied with what we got so far, and I'm looking forward to turning my attention back to the big boat, hoping that we can achieve a similar level of completion over there. But that's a story for another video. If you are like me, stuck in a huge project, remember to distract yourself from time to time, to clear your head and prevent yourself from getting overwhelmed by the task at hand. You could, for example, join the My First Boat Community Facebook group and have a look at other people's projects from all around the world, as we now already have over 1,000 members. Anyway, I'm grateful that you stayed until the end. See you in the next video.